Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday. I'm Kristen Johnson.
How are you guys? Hope you're doing good out there. I want to talk a little bit about something we did last week after the show. We went out to a haunted location in Rhode Island, Foster, Rhode Island, called Ramsdale Mill or Ramsdale Mill, and which is this old mill. It has a ghost story around it. It was founded in 1813 by William Potter and Skinwalker, as well as some other partners. The mill was powered by the nearby wheel powered by the Ponegasset River, and spun and wove woolen cloth. William Potter's two sons managed the operations in tandem with Skinwalker. Walker was supposedly a cranky, angry man, but managed to find his niche as the mill's night watchman, and he would patrol the mill buildings with a lantern in hand and ring the bell after sunrise when it was time for the workers to start the day. There was always tension between Peleg and the Potters, being the son-in-law, and at some point that erupted into a major argument that ended with Walker shouting, "You'll have to take the keys to this mill from a dead man's pocket." And on the morning of May 19th, 1822, the bell did not ring. The confused workers arrived from their houses and found supposedly found Peleg. He's a plague, hanging dead from the bell rope.
It's Peleg.
The keys to the mill were tucked into his pocket, supposedly. Walker was 35 years old, and the locals assumed that Walker's death was a suicide and buried his body nearby. And he was actually buried in the Potter plot, which was unusual considering the nature of what they thought his passing was. It was hard to be buried in consecrated land. And one night, the workers and the Potter family were awakened by the mill's bell ringing wildly. This is post his passing. They ran to investigate, but found the mill was empty. The bell was ringing on its own. The mysterious ringing happened on several other nights, usually at the stroke of midnight, of course, the witching hour. And the Potters took down the bell rope. That didn't help because the bell would still continue to ring. They finally removed the bell itself. This apparently brought some peace for a little while, but other strange things began to happen. Supposedly, the water wheel was seen moving backwards against the flow of the river. The mill's machinery would run by itself late at night, and people would begin to see a specter walking around the mill holding a lantern, supposedly Peleg Walker. Fearing that the mill was cursed, the workers began to find other jobs, and it eventually burned down in 1873, but kept its reputation as a haunted location. In fact, the 1885 Rhode Island census lists the Ramsdale Mill as haunted, making it the only officially haunted place in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. I mean, it's kind of out in the woods. We went out there. I mean, there's just like foundations out there. You can see where the wheel was. A lot of other things have happened in this area as well. I don't have them all detailed for you, but perhaps we'll bring in an expert on the show about Ramsdale Mill to discuss all the real details behind what it is. But it was a wonderful, nice, like day trip.
It was. It's in the woods. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you pull up and you park. There's like a cemetery on your left.
That was
old, and it's like, wow, bonus round.
That's what he says. Pull in. He goes, bonus.
Yep, we didn't know. We didn't know a lot of the details. I've heard about it for years, but I've never been there. So
it was odd because I heard things while I was there. I heard frequency and
you did.
Rocks.
You heard your name called.
I heard my name called, and I kept asking Chris to reassure myself. I'm like, you hear that? I'm like, Christopher. That's what I say. And he's like, nope.
Fortunately, we did bring our recorders and took a lot of pictures and stuff. And we did actually get a couple of EVPs. And I'm going to play one for you. Of course, this is not where we're asking questions. In fact, I'm moving like recorders, and I had a millimeter with me, and a couple of things like around on this rock, and you just kind of hear the background noise of the river, but you'll hear a voice that is not us. If you listen very closely and recommend headphones,
I was going to say that.
Help me. And I've looped it a couple of times. I slowed it down on the third time, but I'll play that for you guys now.
I believe that's in the white noise of the
river itself.
Yeah,
the river is in all the recordings, and it's really peaceful. I mean, I personally did not get like really bad feelings about it, but it was strange, and Kirsten definitely seemed affected. And we had a couple other things too, but we'll save those for another time.
Yeah,
we plan on going back and maybe even at night. We shall see. But yeah, that was fun. Ramsdale Mill, if you Google that, Foster, Rhode Island, which is a Foster Gloucester, very rural community. Oh, look at this! I've lost one of my things, but I got it over here. So we got a great guest for you guys this week. His name is John Olson, and John was born and raised in Cache Valley, Utah. At the age of 8, he began to realize that the mid 1880s farmhouse he was raised in was haunted. Strange experiences such as phantom knocks, loud boots running the stairs, and missing objects became commonplace for him as he grew up, as well as encounters with the man in the hat, which was very intriguing. Fueled by his own experiences with the unknown, John has spent the last 25 years interviewing, documenting firsthand accounts to those of those who have witnessed all sorts of strange and unusual phenomena in the Western United States. The Stranger Bridgerland series of books contains firsthand accounts of everything from ghosts, monsters, hauntings, to glitches in the Matrix, Sasquatch, other cryptids, and UFOs.
Believe that.
So let's bring him on.
Welcome.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you for being here.
For being here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It appears you had a pretty haunted childhood, which we find pretty much commonplace with a lot of people that pursue the paranormal. We've had haunted childhoods ourselves, and a lot of our guests, most of them that we bring on that are, truly into the paranormal or even had alien encounters, had some sort of events in their childhood. Could you tell us about yours?
Yeah, you bet. So, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, because a lot of people that I run into that do this, where they go out and look and they're, actively very interested, is because of either their childhood or having a traumatic experience with the paranormal, like I did growing up. The home I grew up in, like you mentioned, was built in 1883, which in Utah is a very old house. That's pretty old. We're don't have as much pioneer. I mean, we have pioneer heritage and history here. Where you guys are at, the history is much older. But the home that I grew up in was actually originally built by the railroad. Back in the day when they were getting the railroad across the United States, the government gave the railroad land, and then they would eventually sell that land to people, and that's how the railroad would pay for the building of the railroad. And this was one of those situations where they sold the land and the house to a farmer that had come across the plains as a pioneer, and just started from there. It eventually did fall into my family near the turn of the century, around 1910, right around there. I had a great uncle and great grandparents that purchased it, and it's been in my family ever since then. But as you mentioned, by the time I was about 8 years old, I have an older sister that's 4 years older than me, and a younger brother that's a year younger than me. I started realizing that there were things that were going on in my house that didn't happen at my friend's house, and including what one of us kids coined the Stair Monster, because, you know, when you're a kid, you kind of use what words you know. And the steep stairs that go from the main level up to the second level where my bedroom was, any time of the day, you would hear heavy footsteps go up and down the stairs, or children's footsteps running up and down. What we guess, what I really call now just, hauntings that's been there, kind of like a recording that goes over and over again. And then also seeing apparitions every once in a while, and having objects move and disappear. That was a big thing growing up, is we had objects that would disappear right underneath your nose. One story that's one of my favorites about the house, because it's not necessarily directly about me, but it does, explain some of the stuff. It was an early Saturday morning. My mom had gone shopping. It was just me and my brother and my dad that was up. And of course, Saturday morning, when you're a kid, you go down to watch cartoons on the TV. So we're in the basement. And my dad, who had just ordered some new boots, some new hunting boots, got them in the mail, and put the boots on the table and pulled out the shoelaces. And the shoelaces had a thing, tied around them. So he turned around to get the scissors to cut everything off the boots, and turned around, and his shoelaces were missing. The boots were there, but the shoelaces were gone. And he yelled down the stairs at me and my brother, "Give me back, you guys bring back my shoelaces." And we looked at each other and we're like, "We don't have your shoelaces." And he looked under the table and everything and could not find these shoelaces. And he even yelled at us again. And we came to try and help and couldn't find the shoelaces in the kitchen. And frustrated, he finally gave up and went outside to do something. And it, outside on our little table that was on our patio was the shoelaces, not only laying there, but they'd been untied, everything cut off and laying perfectly over the table.
Oh my goodness.
So nobody had been in and out of the house. Nobody, we were the only ones in the house. And so things like that happened quite a bit. I remember also when I was a little boy, I had a little airplane that was one of my favorite things to play with. It was one of those little metal airplanes, if you remember, cast iron, And I remember I was playing in the kitchen again, same place. And I set the plane down on the table, and I turned around over to the sink to get a drink, and I got a drink, and I turned back around, and my plane is missing. But not only is my plane missing, but there's a cap gun laying where my plane was. And so really confused, I looked all over, and I didn't have a cap gun like this. And I took it to my mom, and she looked at it, and it was an old cap gun from the 1920s in pristine condition.
Wow.
And so she's like, "Well, just play with that, I guess." So I did. Oddly enough, I kept that. And it would disappear at times and then reappear. And then it was a couple months later, my airplane just reappeared one day on the table. So stuff like that would happen a lot. Yeah, it's kind of really creepy.
To wonder, was the cap gun there the whole time? Where the house was built in the 1880s? Or was it in a wall?
Right.
It sounds like.
And where'd your plane go,
Child.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the thing, is that there were really old toys that would show up all the time out of nowhere, kind of a thing. And so it was really strange. What happened though was, at this age, if we mentioned anything to my parents, they would not let us talk about it, at least outside of the home. Growing up in a small town, the saying is, you spend all your time in a small town gossiping and trying to avoid being gossip. That's what you do when you're in a small town. Mm-hmm. And so my parents were afraid that people were going to think that we were a little crazy. Right. And so we had to keep it to ourselves for the longest time. And I remember in that time, I just started studying anything I could get my hands on about the paranormal. Bigfoot books. My library had the Time Life series, if you remember the Time Life book series about the unknown.
I had a couple of those myself.
Right. And I read those over and over and over again. I just, anything I could get my hands on. And so it was just fascinating to me with what was going on, and to know that I wasn't alone, which was great.
Information was harder to come by then too. You know, this is all pre-internet.
Pre-internet.
And
libraries.
a few years on us ourselves, and we don't need to admit that. But I remember, you know, with no internet, and the Time Life books were like a big source. Everybody had a set of encyclopedias.
Yes.
I read a lot of Hans Holzer books back then, you know.
Yep. And the other thing I loved, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
I'm just saying, it wasn't as much stuff like there is today. Now it's
right. And I remember watching the reruns of In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. That was my favorite too. So
yeah, that was great.
But anything I could get my hands on paranormal, I read about, because I wanted to know, you know, what was going on, and just that curiosity. When you mentioned the Hat Man, I'll tell you, because it happened during this time in my life. I came home from school one day. I was not very old, probably 10, 11 years old, something like that. And my mom had left. I was the first one home from school. So I made myself a sandwich, went into the front room to watch some TV. And this is the middle of the day, which, you know, things happen all the time in the house. Didn't matter what time of day it was. And I remember I sat down on the couch before I could turn the TV on, and something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. And I turned, and there in the front, right coming into the living room, was a gentleman was standing there. And I could see through him, and I knew he was tall. You could see he was tall. He had overalls on and a white button-down shirt. He had a wide-brimmed hat, but I couldn't see any facial features. And I watched as he walked in and sat across from me in the front room in the rocking chair that was there, and started rocking back and forth. And I closed my eyes and I counted to 10. And when I opened them, he was gone, but the chair was still rocking. So I jumped up and I ran out of the house, waited for my mom to get home. And I told her about it, and she, you know, tried to calm me down and say, you know, I wasn't, you know, I must have imagined it.
I get that.
But what I didn't know at the time is that my parents were having their own experiences, but didn't want to get us even more upset about it. So I would find out later on that my mother had seen the guy, the same apparition before. And in fact, in the house, there was only one bathroom at the time, and it had an entrance from one of the sitting rooms and an entrance from my parents' bedroom into this bathroom. Mm-hmm. And I got home from school one day, and my dad was home, and he was building a wall on my parents' side of the bathroom. And I'm like, why are you doing that? And he said something about, this is what your mom wants, and so you got to help me. So I helped him build the wall. But it wasn't till years later I found out it was because my mother would wake up at night, and the door would be open to the bathroom, and this man in the hat would be standing in the bathroom watching them sleep. So this was her solution to getting rid of that, was to block the door and turn it into a wall. So
did it help her? Did it help?
Well, she didn't wake up to him anymore, but it didn't stop all the activity that went on.
I meant from her seeing him.
Yeah. Yep, he was.
Did you see him as well, or was it just you and your mother? Did you?
Me and my mother. I think everybody in my family has had an experience with him at some point. What's really interesting about the guy is my grandparents. So, on my dad's side of the family, I can trace my family all the way back to the people who settled northern Utah way back in the day. From the original pioneers. And so I have a lot of family, and my grandparents only grew up about a block, actually exactly a block away from me. And when my grandmother passed away, my grandfather had already passed away. When my grandmother passed away, and we were helped kind of cleaning out the house, we came across an old photo book, an old photo album. And I happened to be flipping through it, and I flipped the page, and here's a picture of my house, really old black and white picture. And here's a gentleman standing in the front of the house, and he's got tall, skinny man with a white shirt and overalls and a wide brimmed hat. And I about fell out of my chair.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
Wow.
And come to find out, it was a great uncle of mine, the one that owned the house in the 20s. So
Wow.
I am able to identify who it is that does that part. At least growing up, that was one of the ghosts that lived in the house. So
that's really intriguing, because a lot of people do see, the hat man, a man with a hat.
That's where I thought you
Yours
were
is more a
going
man
with
with a
that.
hat, because
But
he actually lived there. He was a family member, and you have a connection there.
Right. Yep. But I have heard and talked to a lot of people who have seen the shadow hat man, like you guys talked about before, which seems to be, a different kind of entity. I would almost, from what I understand, yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely dark, and he's out there. Kristen had a lot of experience with the hat man.
Right. She was
I
mentioning that.
had one
Paranormal.
a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah.
And
seen shadow
my
figures.
vacuum went flying when I saw that. So I was
Yeah.
Oh,
vacuuming.
really?
We got some hellos out there.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to just say real quick, hello, and we got hello. Is that showing up there? Good morning from Tokyo, Japan.
Wow.
Irene Takura, who also mentions this, which is interesting. We don't have Bigfoot, just a legend of the Yuki Onna Winter Woman, spirit that takes men.
Oh,
so that's cool. That's a legend I'm not familiar with. But
go ahead.
Very
Keep
cool. I'd
messing
like to
with
know
me.
more
And we're
about
gonna,
that.
yeah, keep messing with me. We're gonna move there.
It says hello, yeah, and I'm done. All right, and of course, Anne Marie Young, love it.
Oh, hi, Ann.
That's awesome. Hey,
Yeah.
Anne, how you doing?
Love me, girl.
So,
Love her.
That's awesome. It's interesting. He mentions that a spirit of a woman that takes men. In my travels and in interviewing people, it's amazing to me that when it comes to folklore and the paranormal, a lot of cryptids or a lot of ghost stories or things of that nature, there's creatures from all over, like Europe, Africa, America, and all over Asia, and they may call it something different, but the explanation is very, very similar. What they look like, what they do, and so that's fascinating. I love that.
The essence of the legend remains the same. That's true.
Exactly.
That's true. That sounds, similar to like a succubus kind of
yes,
legend.
Mm-hmm.
We do see that repeated in even different areas of the country. Things like fairies, and we talk about things like puckwudgies out here in the Northeast, right? But nobody talks about that probably in Utah, and that goes to some Native American legend.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I do actually have a story. It's in Stranger West, I believe. I remember all my stories, but I can't remember which books they're in. Of a gentleman here in Utah, not from Cache Valley, that I interviewed, that ran into a creature one night that was it looked just like a pugwudgie, and it. Basically, the story goes, he was hiking. He was supposed to have a friend with him. His friend didn't come. He went on his own because he was in his 20s. And like when we're in our 20s, we're invincible.
Sure.
And he camped the night, and he was woken up in the middle of the night and was trying to figure out what it was that had woken him up. And he got hit in the chest with a small rock. And then something started whistling at him. And he finally found his headlamp and turned it on. And here's this creature sitting on a rock pile about 15 feet from him. It had shabby clothes on, but when he explained it, it almost looked like if you know your Harry Potter, the goblins that run Gringotts in there. His explanation, it looked just like that, pointed features, and he's staring at it in shock. And then he notices it's moving its hand, and he shines the light, and it's got a book that he had a paperback book that he was reading in his sleeping bag. and he realizes that this creature's been close enough to have stolen that from him, and it kind of snaps him out of it, and he just ran out of the forest, left as quick as he could. And he didn't know anything about Native American lore or anything like that. And after I interviewed him and I did research, that's what brought me to the Pugwaji. And the Native Americans here have a different name for him. I can't remember exactly what it is because each nation has different names. But yeah, it's the same kind of creature.
Exactly. I have a whole book of fairies, and it has all the different fairies from the different nations.
That's really interesting. So it looked a little like Dobby.
Yeah, a little bit like Dobby with the pointed features, and very creepy. And obviously, I couldn't even imagine. But when I interviewed him, he just kept saying over and over again that I'm a normal person. I'm really not crazy. This really happened to me, and I get that a lot. Especially if it's seems to be a story that's way out there. It's people are adamant that I'm not crazy. I promise, and I promise this really happened. But
no, we believe him too.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Some quote unquote crazy people maybe also encountering, something we can't see.
Right, exactly. Yep. You just don't know what people's capabilities are. So that's for sure. That's for sure.
What is a ghost to you? What do you lean on? Things like residual energies, intelligent energies? What do you think those energies are?
I think it can be both. I think it can be a residual. I gave this example to somebody. I used to have in my house that I had. I've got an old black lab, and he does his march, or did at the time. I've switched houses since then, but he did his march through the yard in the back, and he did that patrol of his every day, several times a day in this old lab. And no matter how many times I mowed the lawn, I could stand on the porch and point out that trail that he did, no matter the path, his path. And so in a lot of ways, I think that if you repeat something over and over again, and if you might have, depending upon the house or whatever, you could end up with a residual thing, like the footsteps on the stairs is definitely residual. But there's also things that went on in the house and still do. My parents still live in the same house, but there's definitely interactive things that happen in the house as well. We call him the Stair Monster, but he's also loves to play tricks on people. He's like a huge trickster.
He's a trickster.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. My dad a few years ago had knee surgery. And because of that, he had to sleep in his recliner for a long time while he was recovering. And he said there were times where he would be sitting in his recliner almost asleep. And this is the thing, if something changes in the house, that seems to trigger things a lot, which I'm sure you've heard before. And him sleeping in the front room must have been enough of a change. But he said he would be sitting there almost asleep, and he could hear somebody walk up behind him and do the cattle whistle with the two fingers really loud and make him jump. And then he would hear laughter, and then it would go away. So there's definitely both residual and interactive. And then I have interviewed people who have run into a lot darker spirits, I guess you could say, more of I guess you would call them demons or things of that nature. I also have a belief, just from interviewing a lot of people, that there are elementals. Like, I've interviewed a lot of people who have seen the shadow people or dark creatures like this in the wilderness. A lot of them, because of where I live. A lot of at least my original stories and a lot of the other ones dealt with people, running into things in the forest. So
we agree.
Yeah.
It's definitely a mixture of all kinds of things that you can have going on. So
sure, it's more when you say that, it's more like a chaotic energy entity.
Yeah,
I believe it's
that
on chaos.
Aforementioned Ramsdale Mill, often people have reported, there's a lot of reports on the internet about people seeing this kind of shadow figure walking where the mill used to be, and like on like a different floor. It might be kind of appearing to walk there, holding a lantern.
Just the lantern is seen, though, and it's,
right.
So much legend, you wonder what are we creating? Are we doing it in the collective consciousness? I don't know.
Making our own paths, kind of a thing, and so it's very interesting.
Right.
And one thing that I find fascinating is when I've run into people, who talk to me and say, I think I might have a ghost, or I have a ghost, or the first thing I usually tell them is, let's go through the things that are happening, because maybe we can explain it with a natural occurrence or something. And if we can't do that, I try and explain to them, I'm like, most of the time, if it's just a ghost that you have, ghosts are just like people that you meet on the street. 9 out of 10 are really nice people. It's that 1 out of 10 that you got to worry about that might be a real jerk, because I'm sure if you were a jerk in life, you're going to be a jerk in the afterlife, and then that might be, a problem that we're going to have. So I've helped a few people throughout the years who maybe they had a spirit and it was scaring them, but I don't think it knew that it was. What it was doing was frightening their children or something, and just speaking. It sounds weird, but I tell them, if you just speak out loud and let them know that what you're doing is scaring my kids. Can you if you do that, sometimes that alone will fix your problem. So
it's very true.
To actually ask, say,
yeah,
can you leave us alone?
Going right along with that, a few years ago, my wife and I were moving. And we were going to spend like a month in an apartment before our house the new house we could move into. And my parents were like, "Oh, don't do that. Just come stay upstairs at our house." And so we're like, "Okay, that'll be okay. And we can help you guys out a little bit." And so my wife was okay with staying there, but she's like, she'd heard all these stories, and she's like, the ghost, I'm really worried about the ghost. And I said, I will say that you're not comfortable with it. So we did. When we moved upstairs, I said, yeah, look, this is Annie. She's not comfortable with your antics. She's scared. Please leave her alone. So we went 3 of the 4 weeks, nothing happened. And we were folding clothes upstairs. And jokingly, she said, I don't know about your ghost stories, because we've been here for 3 weeks and I haven't seen anything. And laughing, I said, well, I guess if you want him to show himself or let you know that he's here, I'm sure he'd love that. And she laughed it off. And the very next morning, I got up super early and left for work. And she was laying in bed. And she's almost back asleep. And something crawled into bed and ran their fingers through her hair, and then she realized John's gone to work. Who is that? And she jumped out of bed, and she heard laughter. And I said, well, you told him it was okay, so now he's going to bother you. And so for the last week, he definitely let her know that he was there.
Wow,
which was really interesting. Yeah. She would be changing clothes upstairs and hear a whistle, and she's like, I'm glad we're leaving in a week.
Yeah.
But
that's
you get a comment from Ian.
Yeah, there's a comment here about dogs and paths and that kind of stuff. Anne Marie Young says, I had a dog that had a path through my house from the front door to the back door, checking every room in the house. After he died, he could still be heard. He would growl too. And had more than one friend leave in the middle of the night.
Oh my.
And then she mentioned,
wow, that's awesome.
Leave a few years later. So there you go. It goes.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, definitely. I've heard of stories of animals, especially beloved animals, that come back and let people know that they're still around, and that I think that bond is also really strong as well. So both with loved ones and everything like that.
I believe I have a cat. One of my cats is with me as well. I can feel it come up on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
I know I sound crazy, but a couple of times that's happened. So
yeah, I've heard that from people as well. Even people in my family who have lost a pet, and in between sleep, they can feel it jump on the bed and curl up by them, and so that's
There's
cool.
something about that being in between
I was
sleep
just gonna say
state.
that, yeah.
Mhm.
And we hear reports of out-of-body experiences and have had that experience
Right.
at ourselves, and sleep paralysis, the old hag. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of folklore that surrounds it, but there's also a lot of people that have real valid experiences.
One of my own experiences, and this is in my very first book. So Annie, who I'm married to now, I was previously married, and my first wife was a hairdresser, and excuse me, my oldest son at the time was just an infant, and my wife at the time would get up Saturday mornings really early to go do wedding updos. That was the thing at that time of year. And my grandmother on my mom's side, my mother is from Denmark, and my grandmother, who I was close to, had passed away, but I was unable to go to the funeral because it was clear in Europe at the time, so only my mother and dad were able to go. And it had been about 6 months, and it was a Saturday morning. My wife got up, got ready, left, and I'm just laying in bed in that near, in between kind of state. And there was a knock at my bedroom door, and I said, "Come in." And my grandma came in, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and we had a conversation about how everybody was doing in the family. And all of a sudden, I looked at her and I said, "Grandma, you passed away." And she smiled and she said, "That doesn't mean I can't come visit from time to time." And she said, she got up and said goodbye and went out the door. And as soon as she did, I came fully awake. And, a lot of people have told me, well, you had a dream, you had whatever, but I really believe, I could smell her perfume after she left. It was very,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times that, as a lot of people have that sense, there's a smell sometimes.
Yes.
Also with my grandfather on my mom's side, who had passed away as well in Denmark, and I wasn't able to go to the funeral for years afterwards. I was still a kid at the time. Nobody in our family drank coffee, and we knew when Grandpa was visiting because that strong smell of coffee would waft through the house, and we well, Grandpa's visiting, and so it's very interesting that way.
Yeah, I believe that. A lot of people report that perfumes and the smells of cigars or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, most definitely. Sorry.
That's okay. I was just gonna segue maybe into Bigfoot and some of the cryptids of Utah, because everybody knows Bigfoot, and I don't know all the cryptids out there.
So yeah, there's definitely Bigfoot is a big one here in Utah, especially in North. Well, for those of you that don't know, I'm sure you guys have heard of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
It's in central Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And Skinwalker Ranch is right on the edge of the Uinta Mountains, which is runs right through the center of the state. And there is a lot of things that go on there. Not just everybody thinks of Skinwalker Ranch because it does have a lot of activity, but the Uintas have a lot of UFOs, Bigfoot, and cryptids, and it's got a great Native American history. I interviewed a gentleman who I haven't put his story in any of the books, but it was related to me. He was talking about he was elk hunting at the time, and in the middle of the night, he was woken up with Native American drums, and it drove him out of the camp, and he had to eventually leave. It was so loud and so, just upsetting. But up here in northern Utah, where I am, I've gathered a lot of Bigfoot stories, and also a few of like I said, the Pagwaji was big. And that's a really fun story as well. In Nevada, I interviewed a gentleman who he worked outside of Reno, Nevada. And at the time, him and his girlfriend wanted to go camping. And so he didn't know much about camping. He didn't grow up that way, but his girlfriend did. So he wanted to, make things, exciting. And so they bought a bunch of stuff, borrowed a bunch of stuff. And they went into the Sierra Nevadas, oddly enough, near Donner's Pass camping. and he was telling me that his story. He woke up in the middle of the night to just a really strange sound, dragging a footstep with a dragging sound. It was very strange, and he finally made his way to this thing was walking around their camp, and he finally unzipped the tent, and standing right next or facing away from him, not too far from the tent, is this creature thing. At first, he thought it was a homeless person because it was pale, very emaciated, just really kind of, horrible looking. And when he called out and it turned to look at him, he could tell it was almost mostly skeleton, just really horrible thing. And when he yelled, it ran off, dragging a foot is what it was doing. Had very little clothes on. Anyway, they ended up driving away and getting lost and spending the night scared to death of this creature. But from what I could tell from his story and the things that are going on, it sounded very much like a Wendigo type creature, something that was created according to Native American lore when somebody is either forced or turns to cannibalism or something like that. These creatures are created out of this experience, and they wander the earth, never being able to fill their need for food. And when I interviewed the guy and listened to how scared he got telling this story, I believed fully in what he was trying to tell me, and made me realize how many things out there, whether it's cryptid, whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's ghosts. Yeah, that there's right.
Donner's Pass, and there's
Donner Party.
Yeah,
exactly. So you wonder if it's a spirit that's there near because of the Donner Party or other things, that go on, and it's just amazing. I love
so
yeah. I was thinking about a homeless person when the first thought that popped in my head. There's a guy that walks by our house here, that seems to drag a leg and walk a little funny, but what happens after the bars close?
Oh, right.
So you got to hear this. You got to picture it. He comes walking up the hill, and he's
there's a big hill in front leading up to where my house.
He's really inebriated,
and
he's got very, very long arms, and he has a really hard time. And he looks just like, what do you say to me? He's coming for you, Barbara.
Barbara.
Like The Walking Dead, yeah,
and he really does. The poor guy. And
he's not dead yet.
No, but yeah,
I'm not dead yet. I'm happy.
I'm not
real healthy.
I'm getting better.
Yes. There you go.
Yep. You gotta love that. Monty Python and the Holy Grail is so awesome.
Oh,
in the direction. Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries.
Yeah, we're big fans.
Oh yeah. It's I say things sometimes, and my kids just look at me. They're like, "What are you talking about?" And so
we understand completely.
The original, I read the book from the original family that it all started from, and some of the things they had go on was just like, I mean, it's tough to creep me out after everything I've seen, but reading that definitely creeped me out.
I can imagine. We've heard a lot of stories.
It's very spooky, and certainly one of those areas that are like a window area or portal area.
Where
you get a whole host of activities. There's UFOs, there's Bigfoot, there's ghosts and
Wendigos. I mean,
Wendigos.
Yeah. Well, and not too far from there's a town called Vernal, and I've talked to a lot of people from Vernal, and they're like, they have a basically they say you've either seen at least one UFO or you haven't lived there for 6 months yet. So there's just a lot of things that go on there. In fact, in my new book, I have a interview. I interviewed a gal, and she told me her story, and she was going from Vernal to another town. Actually, she's coming back to Vernal in the middle of the night, and she's running through the canyons, and all of a sudden she thought it was a wildfire because the whole canyon next to her was just glowing orange. And she thought, oh no, I'm going to be driving through a wildfire. And this giant ship rose up out of the canyon, and she watched it, rise up above the trees and over and across the road and then disappear. But it was so immense. She said that it looked like the whole forest was on fire coming out of the canyon. So just a lot of strange things that happen.
Do you believe that it came from, I don't know what she had said, but from underground, like an interdimensional portal, or was it already landed? I mean, had it landed already?
She didn't say. It could have been any of those things. It could have been sitting in the bottom down there. It could have come up from somewhere. It's interesting because the more, I would like a lot of other things. The more things I learn, the more I realize I don't know, especially when it comes to the paranormal. And so, for a long time, I thought of UFOs as just coming from another world, traveling that far. But like you say, the more you learn and the more you hear, and there's all kinds of different things that, they could be coming from another dimension. They could be coming from traveling that way. It's fascinating. It's just really fascinating.
It is. It could be a consciousness thing, an invasion of consciousness, and we perceive these things. Yeah, I totally agree with you. The more we've been doing this, the more we get this idea like, wow, we don't know everything, and it all seems more related than it did for me, say, growing up. And I think a lot of people were like that. They were in the paranormal camp, or they were in the UFO camp, and one kind of didn't believe in the other so much, or they didn't get along.
Right.
But a lot of that's been changing, even though the phenomena has been similar for literally hundreds, maybe thousands of years. We're seeing more and more people kind of come out and learn about each other, and that's a wonderful thing. That's good that we can kind of share that information, because there are so many similarities.
Right. And you hear a lot of different proposals and theories, and I just love learning about all of them. And I remember one thing kind of along these lines. I was just reading up about the simulation theory. I'm sure you guys have heard of that we live in a simulation.
Sure,
and
I talk about it all the time.
Right. And what was funny was my youngest son, he's 14 now, so I guess he'd be around 12 at the time. We were talking, and he had heard something about the simulation theory, and we were just talking about it. And he said, he's basically like, I have a theory, Dad. And I said, okay. Well, I said, what's your theory? And he says, well, in all of my video games that I play, the guys that create the video games, they love to put Easter eggs in the video games, hidden things. He goes, what if all of your UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts are just Easter eggs in our simulation? And I said, that's maybe excellent. That's what it is, buddy.
That's a good thought. Cool. Yeah, it really could be. And you wonder, we've seen things. We're paranormal investigators, researchers, and all that, and we're always looking for like the data to show other people and stuff, especially here with the show.
Right.
But it's the experience that is really intriguing, just having that experience. And wonder, your brain just goes, ooh, did that really happen? Did you see that? We're looking at each other and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like an Easter egg within a game.
I love that.
That's a great analogy.
That's great.
I love it.
Yeah, it was a good thought that he had. But like you say, it's the experience when you have an experience, or I talk to people who they're like, oh, I want to get into ghost hunting and stuff like that, and I tell them, a lot of them, I'm like, so it's really fun, but it's a lot of hard work too. I don't do that necessarily. I will go out every once in a while with groups that invite me, and I love to do that. But they watch the television shows where they go out one night and have like a list of things that they, we found all this. And I talk to some researchers will go out to the same place 5 times before they finally get something that they can say, oh, this is credible. Listen to this actual, EVP. So it's fascinating though. I love it. There are
a lot of skeptics that are actually very good paranormal investigators, and they're great at debunking things and trying to prove that what you just saw isn't real. But our perceptions are what they are.
Right.
You hear a voice on a tape, or you see something that maybe isn't on captured on camera.
Or
It doesn't mean it didn't happen.
or the or the
Right.
recorder. We
Yeah.
had that happen to us.
Yeah.
So
Right. And
What we heard that didn't go on the recorder.
recorders didn't capture it. It was a huge hello, and
it scared us. It was so loud. We actually jumped.
yeah, and then it didn't show up on anything, right?
Got the whole story. Kristen had noise canceling headphones on a recorder, and we were walking through a haunted location, and she could only hear what was coming through the recorder. Yeah. So that's our ears right there, right?
So
just
loud.
holding it.
Right.
We were both walking next to each other, and we heard somebody go, "Hello!" like really loud, enough that it scared the crap out of us. We literally jumped in the air. I'm looking around. I can't find. There's nobody around. And when we played the stuff back, there was no hello. Yet she heard it. And the only thing she could hear came to the recorder, but
came from the recorder, but it wasn't recorded. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
The experience was,
you're right.
More than any kind of data. I consider that one of our best paranormal experiences because we had it and it wasn't on a recorder.
Right.
But we know we heard it. It scared us. So,
yeah,
we have the clip of it. I swear.
Yep, we're swearing the whole thing. So.
Oh yeah, you catch your reaction, but not the sound. That's awesome.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, and like you say, when you've had experiences like you guys have, like I have, it's almost comical when you run into somebody that's like, "Oh, I don't believe that," or something like that, and you're like, "It's okay, because until you have your own experience, it's hard to explain that. It's once you've had the experience, there's no going back. But it's amazing how many people that I interview for the books who that will be their only experience with the paranormal, but it changes their mindset. It changes it opens up, their belief system, I guess you could say. And then you want to learn as much as you can, especially, whether it was a UFO, whether it was Bigfoot or ghost or whatever it was. I know for me, I've interviewed a lot of people who've had run-ins with Bigfoot, but I spent my whole life in the mountains where I grew up. The outdoors was what we did as a family. When other kids were skipping school to go to the mall, I skipped school to go fishing or hunting or into the mountains or hiking and I've never had that experience to see a Bigfoot. My son and I did come across some tracks that were amazing, but we've never seen one. I've never seen one or been close as far as I know. But having interviewed as many people as I have and hearing their stories, I know there's something to it. And I know there's definitely something out there. How it all relates, I don't know, but definitely there.
I totally relate to that. Kristen and I spent a good deal of time in the woods in our childhoods as well, and playing in the woods and that kind of stuff. And I love nature. I've never seen a Bigfoot, not once. So I kind of didn't believe in this stuff. But again, as go on, and you hear more and more stories, and things happen to you that you can't logically explain away, and that kind of thing. You go, well, you try, and you just sound crazy or something.
Right.
Who are we to say, no, you didn't have that experience?
Right. And that's another thing that, as I interview people, I always think, well, that's got to be the craziest story I've ever heard. And then along will come another one that tops that. And I always keep an open mind. I have to go off of my gut feeling, when I'm interviewing people and talking to them but it's really kind of opened my eyes to everybody's experience, because you can't, like I said, you can't quantify it unless you've lived it. One story I'll tell you real quick that kind of explains what I'm talking about. I interviewed this gal. She grew up in a rural part of Idaho, and her family was not very well off. And so growing up when she was little, and I'm going to mess up the ages because I don't have them right in front of me, but when she was around 10 years old, all she wanted in the world was a puppy. And she knew she wasn't going to get one for her birthday because her parents didn't have the money. And she comes home from school, and this is in May somewhere around there. And sure enough, her parents gave her a puppy, and she's so excited. It was a lab border collie cross, if I remember correctly.
Huh.
And she names the dog, starts teaching it tricks, loves this dog. And one of the things her parents did near the end of July, 1st of August, was they would go as a family and cut wood so that they had something other than just gas to heat the house. That was what they did as a family. And so they go up there, and she takes her dog with her. And she saved up her money and worked to buy a special name collar on the dog and taught it these tricks. And they go up and they start working. And in the middle of the day, the dog disappears. And she's just heartbroken. And they look all day and can't find the dog. She even convinces her dad. This is a Saturday. She convinces her dad to go up Sunday. And they go look, and they can't find the dog. And she's devastated. So 5 years go by, and she's gotten out of going to get the wood because she's like, it brings back too many bad memories and all this. And finally, she's about 15 years old, and her dad says, you're not going to use that excuse anymore. We got to go. It's just me, you, and your brother today, and I need your help. And so she goes, and her brother and her dad were cutting down the trees. She was waiting for her time to go knock the limbs off. That was part of her job. And they're in the same area where she lost her dog 5 years ago. And she says she looks down the road, and there's something coming up the road, the dirt road, towards her. And she's looking, and it comes up, and it looks just like her dog. And I can't remember the name of the dog. I don't have it in front of me. She calls the name, and it comes to her. And she looks, and it's got the collar. The collar's brand new. It's still got the name tag on her. She tells it to do tricks. It does the tricks she asks, and she just breaks down crying. And her dad comes around looking for her, and she's like, look, my dog came back. And he's like, that was 5 years ago. That can't be your dog. Somebody's playing a trick on you, something. And she's like, we're in the middle of the mountains, And so she goes home. She's super happy, and her parents are skeptical, to say the very least. So the next day, her mom says, we're going to take the dog to the vet just to have it checked out, because I want to know what it is, what's going, She says, don't tell the vet that this is your lost dog. Just don't. She's like, okay, but I know it is. And the vet looks over the dog, and he says, well, you've got a really healthy dog. It's about as big as it's going to get, but it's only about 6 months old. But it's not going to get any bigger. It's healthy, everything's good. And her mother was just flabbergasted, and she doesn't know where the dog was. She doesn't understand how the dog came back. She says, I know it was the same dog. We were up in the middle. We were 14 miles in the backwoods of nowhere. There wasn't anybody around. There's no way, but somehow that dog disappeared and reappeared 5 years later and had not aged a day.
So what do we think about this? Do we think it's abduction? I mean, how can we
right?
explain
That's true. That is like
that's the thing.
Time lapse.
Time something. Yeah, something folded. I don't know. But like I said, it's one of the strangest stories I've ever come across. She said, I had the dog for another 10 years, lived to a ripe old age and passed away. And she goes, I know it was my dog. She goes, I don't know how it happened. My family doesn't know how it happened. We were never allowed to talk about it. But she goes, it was my dog. The other thing too is it had a specific shape. An S, almost an white S shape on its chest. That was very unique to the dog too. And that's how she knew. Somebody couldn't have just got one that looked like her dog. That was another thing. It had an S shape. And she called it Sammy, I believe was the name, because of the S-shaped white patch on it. But and like I said, that's one of the most amazing stories. But she was matter of fact. That I asked her if she'd had any other paranormal anything, and she goes, no, I've had a very normal life, but I had this happen. And you mentioned, what happened? What do you think happened?
Right.
Boy, I don't know. I know that a lot of strange things happen in the wilderness. A lot of strange things.
Yeah, they
I've
do.
interviewed people who've seen portals, who've seen creatures, who've seen, experienced just really strange phenomena in the wilderness. So who knows? Maybe that dog stepped through a portal and it didn't know the difference. So who knows?
And he stepped back 5 years later. That's an awesome story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with the description of like the S and stuff, it kind of rules out that, maybe the father had planted the dog and then.
Right. That was one of the things too.
The other dog had maybe gone to the farm their parents told us about.
Right. Yeah, gone to the nice farm upstate.
Upstate,
Yeah,
right.
the upstairs dog farm.
Yep.
Yeah,
So-
it doesn't sound like that at all. And wow, that
No.
is a cool story.
That is really cool.
And if you're, as a parent, I know if you're gonna do that, when you do it right away, try and find something if you're gonna try and replace it, or to make. But 5 years later, why would you?
That's
You'd just be confusing a kid.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You're just
So
twisting the poor kid's mind a little bit.
yeah.
We got
So-
some comments out there. It says, Anita Allen, I had some run-ins with something unexplainable, intelligent in the woods. Way back, only critter that fit it was Bigfoot. That's how I ended up researching them. Well, that's
Wow,
cool.
I didn't know that.
And yeah, that's so cool, says Dawn.
I don't.
Yeah.
Very nice.
That's-
Very cool.
It's I just love hearing people's stories, and it's amazing where they all come from. I took my son fishing yesterday, and there was a lady on the dock, and we got talking, and she saw and my wife, she asked what I did, and I said, and she started right away into her story, and I had to give her a card, and I'm like, yeah, let's talk, let's get your story. Hers was up in Alaska. She was a tour guide in an old town, and she had experiences with some of the prostitutes that used to live in the town that still haunted the house that she was in. And so it's amazing where I get my stories. Sometimes they just come out of nowhere, like where I don't expect to meet somebody, but they find out what I do and they're like, oh, I have a story, or it's amazing.
That's
So-
great.
Yeah, I've noticed that your books seem to have trended. Your collection of
Yes.
books from starting in Bridgerland. We had Stranger Bridgerland, then we go to Beyond Stranger Bridgerland. Then we go into Stranger West.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go into Stranger US. It's just like the circle's growing here. We're going to take stories from
It is.
people.
And I hope it just keeps growing. It's so, just a quick backstory. Like I was saying, when I was younger, my parents didn't let us talk about the ghosts much at all. But as I got to be a teenager, I had friends over at my house, and they would have experiences of their own in my house. And they would have to say, what was that? Or they would hear the Stair Monster. And they would say, somebody's walked up your stairs 3 times, but there's nobody there. And I finally had to admit, well, my house is haunted. And then I would start telling my stories. And by the time I was 17, I would go to a party or something, and somebody would be like, oh, John's got some cool ghost stories. And so I started telling them. And it was at that point people started coming to me with their stories. And like you said before, back in the day, we didn't have the internet. We just had local stuff. So for forever, 20 years or so, I just gathered stories. Sometimes I would hear a story, oh, this happened to my uncle. And then I would spend months tracking down that uncle or where that story came from to get it. And I remarried 6 years ago. And Annie was like, I had to explain kind of this part of me, as you do. And she's like, well, what are you going to do with all those stories? And I said, well, maybe someday I'll write a book. And she was awesome because she's like, no, I think you're going to write one now. So she's like, she helped me with the first one.
Wow.
And it was all local stuff, like you said, because I've just been local for most of it. And as I've been on, been blessed to be on shows like you guys' shows and get my website out and start speaking places, it's just expanded. And like you say, it keeps going. And I just love it. Interviewing people from all over the country, and now a few in Canada and a couple from Mexico. It's just been fantastic. I love it.
It's great.
That's awesome. And you mentioned your website. And for those of you that are just listening and can't see the ticker, it is www.strangerbridgerland.com.
And I was going to explain somebody asked about the Bridgerland part. How did that come about? The
Yes.
Bridgerland part.
I was just going to ask you that.
So, have you guys seen this? Is kind of weird. Have you guys seen the movie The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio when he was a mountain man and he gets mauled by the bear? And
Yes, we've seen that.
okay, so in that, it's based on a true story. One of the young men that leave him, there's a Tom Hardy's the bad one, and then there's a young guy that's the good one that leave him when he's sick and dying. The younger man plays a trapper named Jim Bridger, who was a real character. He was a real individual. Jim Bridger came west and actually was one of the first white men to explore all of northern Utah, southern Idaho, parts of Wyoming, and he trapped here. And when he left, eventually, he's the one that helped do the maps and help guide some of the pioneers to the area. So northern Utah, which encompasses Box Elder County, Cache County, Ridge County, and then parts of Wyoming and parts of southern Idaho, are actually called Bridgerland after Jim Bridger. And so because my first books were stories from that area, I thought it would be cool to name it Stranger Bridgerland, because it's kind of that. So it's kind of a long story, but that's how it got its name originally. Bridgerland is from Jim Bridger.
Oh, wow. I know that.
And you mentioned that I grew up and I live in Cache Valley. Most people think of it as cache, like as in C-A-S-H, but it's actually C-A-C-H-E, which is the French word for cache, meaning to hide or stash or store, because that's what the trappers did as they got all their pelts and everything. They do a dugout in a hill and hide them there until they could finally get them all out and sent back east, and it was called a cache, so they named it Cache Valley. A little history for you there.
Nice. Well, I love history.
Yes.
But
you mentioned, or in your bio, it's mentioned about glitches in the Matrix. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I found that some people's stories didn't really match up with ghosts. They didn't match up with cryptids. They were just kind of really strange things that happen to people that they can't explain. And it kind of covers a lot of different things. One of the first ones I remember, I interviewed a young man who was going to school at Utah State University here in Cache Valley. And he was getting close to graduating, and it was spring, and he had to study for a test. So he grabbed his bike, grabbed his stuff to study, his backpack, and drove up onto the campus, which is the quad up on campus. He laid out his blanket and is sitting there studying in the sun and enjoying the day. He says it's a normal, everyday kind of a day. And all of a sudden, there's people going around, not a lot of people because it's Saturday, but somebody has stopped in front of him. And so he looks up from his book, and he looks right into his own eyes. He's looking at somebody that looks just like him. He said he was dressed the same. He had the same bike, the same backpack. He said the only difference when he looked at him is he's a big Seattle Seahawks fan. And he was wearing a Seattle Seahawks hat, but the other guy was wearing what looked like a Seattle Seahawks hat, but the colors were different. There was an orange instead of a purple or blue, and he's kind of in shock for a second, staring at what is basically himself. And he goes to say something to the guy, and the guy freaks out and takes off on his bike. So he hurries and jumps on his bike and takes off after him. And there's a building on campus, which is actually one of the most haunted buildings on campus. It's called Old Main. And the guy on the bike goes around the corner, but when he goes around the corner, the guy's gone. He's completely disappeared.
Wow.
And he was just in shock. He had seen his doppelganger, basically. And I said, was there? He said it was just like looking into a mirror. The only difference was the hat was a different color. And
that there'd be some little minute difference there too.
yes, some little difference. And so he asked me, he was like, what do you think it was? What did I see? And I was like, I don't know. Did you, was there somehow that two universes bumped up against each other at the wrong time, at the right time?
Mhm.
I didn't want to tell him this, but last time I talked to him, he was fine. But there's like supposedly this folklore that if you see your doppelganger, it's really bad luck. But he hadn't had any bad luck as far as I knew. But yeah, he had seen, basically himself, but not himself, and just was a shock. And he's like, I went to school. I've never had a paranormal experience. I don't know what it was, but I know who I am. And that was me. I was looking at myself. And he said the funny thing is that the other guy seemed just as shocked as he was at seeing himself. So
I bet.
Really?
I bet.
yeah,
Like,
it was a shock for both of them.
Some like multiverse kind of thing
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
Dimensions crossing or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another story that's one of my favorites from Glitches in the Matrix. I interviewed a gentleman. He was from a small town in Colorado, and he was raised LDS, Mormon, for those of you that don't know. And he went through high school in the 90s and graduated, and he left for 2 years to serve his church. And when he got back, he was doing a job, something with installing computers for people in their houses, and he went to a house, and he's like, I know this house. How do I remember this house? And when he went in, he remembered that one of his good friends grew up in that house, and then he'd been there. Her I can't remember her name right off the top of my head. I apologize. And he asked the homeowner, he said, well, I used to have a friend that lived here. And she goes, oh, well, I just bought this house a year ago. The family that lived here, their daughter died, and they were really distraught. And so they've moved somewhere else. And he thought, well, my friend, I can't believe my friend died. And so he goes to the library after work. And sure enough, he finds her obituary. She had died of an appendicitis, and that had burst, and they couldn't save her. And he's really upset. I mean, they were good friends in high school, and he hadn't heard anything when he was on his mission. And so he even drives to the local cemetery and finds her headstone. And he's pretty upset about it, but he asks a couple friends, and they're like, oh yeah, she passed away from an appendicitis. And so jump forward many years, he goes to Utah to go to school, graduates, gets married, he's got some small kids, and he goes back to visit every once in a while. Well, it's Thanksgiving, and they're going to his parents for Thanksgiving. They're sitting there waiting. His wife and his mom are making dinner, and his mom's like, I forgot the whipped cream. We need whipped cream for the pie. And he says, well, I'll go to the store and get whipped cream. It's fine. And so he goes up to the little local store, and he's looking for, there's a lot of people in the store, and he's walking down the aisle, and he walks around the corner and runs into a shopping cart. And he says he looks up and here's his friend with a little boy in the cart, the one that's passed away, that he knows passed away.
Oh
and he's like, and she recognizes him. She's like, oh, I haven't seen you in forever, and gives him a big hug. And they sit there and they talk for a minute, and he's really confused.
I can imagine.
And he says, did I hear something about you being sick like a year after high school or shortly after? And she's like, oh, I had an appendicitis that burst and I almost died, and it was really bad. And so after they finished talking, he's like, I'm in shock because that's not matching with my memory. So he leaves the store, doesn't even get the whipped cream, drives 4 miles to the little cemetery, and where her headstone used to be, it's not there anymore. There's somebody else buried there. And he goes home, and they're like, what happened? Where's the whipped cream? And he kind of blows it off. But he says, I know what I remember, and I know my memories, and the life that I live now with that friend, that part is different than my memories of what I remember. I remember going to the cemetery. I remember reading her obituary in the paper. I remember very vividly being very upset about that. And now she is alive and she has kids and she's married.
Wow.
And he's like, I can't explain it. I don't know, you know. He's like, I know that I didn't imagine that. I remember the day that I went to the house and talked to the lady that lived there, you know. And so, and again, it's another person that doesn't, you know, he's like, I don't believe in ghosts and I'm not really, you know, into UFOs or anything like this, but he says, I can't explain what happened to me. I can't explain how my memories do not match what's going on. And I explained to him a little bit about the Mandela Effect and
Yeah, I was going to say where the memories were
maybe it's a personal Mandela Effect thing where, you know.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
Yep.
The Mandela Effect is so strange.
Oh yeah, it really is.
It's like in mass, people remembering things certain ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's strange.
Yep. We live in a matrix a lot of times, you know.
You never know. And when you listen to, you know, some people, you know, scientists that come up with theories and they're like, oh, it's only a 1 in a billion chance that we live in the real world or something, and you're like, wow, that's kind of amazing. And it makes you wonder, am I a real character, or am I just part of somebody's story?
I think it's Neil Tyson deGrasse that says that the odds are, you know, more likely that there is somebody living on a planet just like this one with your name looks exactly like you living your life simultaneously as you than it is to not, because of the amount and great volume of planets and galaxies out there.
And not only that, they also talk about, as Anita Allen said over here, it's proved in physics as well. It's multiverse and simulation theories.
It seems to be.
Well,
that dream, I had a dream I've talked about on the show before, but it was really strange. I'll just quickly cap it with you because it does kind of fit into this, where I was having this kind of like normal dream, and like Kristen was in and other people, and it was just normal wackadoodle stuff. But at some point in the dream, I put my head down on a rail and I went to sleep and had an astral projection, which I've had a side of it within the dream. And in that astral projection, I was like flying down it. I was in a different place and flying down a street, and all the buildings had a certain graphic, almost like the video games you mentioned, quality to them. Like they weren't quite real. They seemed to be pixelated, slightly pixelated. Like it was like, well, something's weird came out of it because I got nervous or something where I was sleeping. I thought I was going to fall, and I knew this within the dream, right? Came back out, continued to dream, and then just woke up and said, okay, what the hell just happened?
Right.
That for over a week.
Yeah.
It messed him up so bad.
It did.
Right.
The impression was very, very vivid. And, you know, the fact that the buildings within the dream within the dream were pixelated, it made me wonder, wow, maybe there is something to this simulation theory.
Right. And I know that in Native American folklore, they believe that the dream world is just as important as the real world, you know, in a lot of what they believe and how it all works together. So who knows? I mean, we spend how much percentage of our life sleeping, or at least supposed to. So you have no idea on how to access it. The other day, my youngest, who's 14, he came to me and he said, we love to talk. He's the one that had the idea about the Easter eggs. And he says, I want to get a motorcycle. And I said, motorcycles are too dangerous. I'm like, and he goes, you had a motorcycle at my age? And I said, yeah. And I crashed a lot. And he goes, yeah, but you didn't die. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure I'm a main character. So of course I'm not going to die. I don't know about you. And he laughed. He goes, that's me.
Yeah,
that's cute.
I could relate to that. I've had those thoughts, like, you know, is it really me, the same me that started out here? Because I've had some close encounters and, you know, and some things you wonder, like, right, you know, picked up another lifetime, and that's what
another life.
The memory
game was reset. Who knows?
Well, and it's amazing too. I just watched a show where they talk about children who are really young, I guess less than the age of 5, who who talk about their past lives, which is also kind of amazing as well. And I you know, I'm not sure how that all works or anything, but I remember as a little child talking about how telling my mom I drowned in the river when we were coming across the, you know, the country, and I left the thing, and she was telling me about that. So, you know, it's amazing all the different things that could be out there or what it all could mean. So
Right.
Actually, here's a relevant comment. Anne Marie Young says, are we really sleeping, or is that us when we are alive and connected? That is a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered that myself. What is going on when we're sleeping?
yeah, that's so true.
This is a dream.
I remember reading a short story by a science fiction author, and I really wish I could remember what it was because I've looked for it and can't find it. And it was talking about a company that had invented a way that when you're asleep, you can connect to a matrix type thing and still go do things with your friends and all of that, and how it kind of went all wrong and started screwing people up. But I wish I could remember the name of that short story because it was an amazing one. But you just, with technology coming the way it is, who knows? You know?
Exactly. Some of the things Elon Musk has planned for us here.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
He's certainly a big thinker.
Yeah.
AI stuff scares the heck out of us too.
Yeah.
It's,
you know,
I don't know. We're gonna end up like the Terminator. What the heck's coming up? And they're already learning. So
Ghost in the Machine, right? A real one.
Yeah. Exactly. You just never know. I remember reading the article about the two computers that they were working on, and I'm terrible at remember names, but they forgot about them and put them in a room. They were connected and found out they'd created their own language and were still talking to each other, you know, a few years later. And so, yeah, that's really scary about what could happen with computers.
Yeah, they don't always handle everything like humans would when they do the AI.
Right.
Thought about AI is probably think, well, they're just gonna tell it to, you know, be nice or whatever, but that's not necessarily what happens.
Mm-mm.
And they can kind of take on a personality of their own.
Know this, especially with that story.
Right. Yeah.
So these people should know this, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
Reminds me of that Rush song 100.
Yeah.
and who knows? So, like, as much as the government is releasing about UFOs and stuff, it feels like we're coming to something big. So
yes,
disclosure, just having conversations where the government more or less is admitting that these things exist is pretty mind-blowing in and of itself, and I'm not sure why.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, for years it's all been
starting to tell people, I guess.
Right. Admitting that they've seen things and shown the video, and they're like, yeah, we don't know what it is, or they do and they haven't told us. It seems like a big step for sure. So
it's definitely a big jump.
Yeah, it is. And I've interviewed, you know, several people who've had UFO experiences that seems to be a big one too, that changes people's lives, helps them open up their world as well, and just seeing something that they'd had a hard time understanding from their point of view. So
what kind of correlations do you see between the UFO experiencers and maybe abductees and the paranormal?
You know, I've interviewed a lot of people who've seen UFOs. I have not interviewed anybody, at least as far as I know, who is an abductee. I do feel like, personally, I'm sure you guys have talked about David Paulides and the Missing 411 book series.
Yeah, great series.
I've studied that because, you know, it's right up our wheelhouse with everything. And I wonder if there is not a correlation between UFOs and the missing people in that aspect, and UFOs, because there's a lot of people that I've interviewed who have seen UFOs when they've been in the mountains, when they've been back and away from everything, and so there's definitely a correlation between the strange things that are going on in the woods and I believe UFOs. What it is, I'm not sure, but I feel like there's a correlation somehow.
I think there is too. And then the Bigfoot kind of steps back into the picture. I know one of the episodes of that we watched, these people talked about camping like back in like the late 60s or something like that, a camping spot they had out in the mountains somewhere. I forget where it was. And they actually had recordings of the Bigfoot, or I don't know what the plural is it big feet? I don't know. Sasquatches howling. And it was disturbing to hear that.
It really was,
something they just probably could not have generated those kind of noises back then and recorded them.
Right. Yeah. I think it's the Sierra tapes or something. And when they're chattering back and forth and they're not able, like you say, they wash it through a computer and they're like, yeah, it's not metallic, but it's not within the range of people's vocal cords at all. So
exactly. Yeah. That's right. It was outside of our vocal range of humans. And they wouldn't have had the kind of technology, at least I don't think so, to manufacture these sort of things. So. Right.
Yep, exactly. And so it makes you wonder, what the whole correlation is between, is there a correlation between Bigfoot and UFOs, or is there a correlation between, the creatures in the woods and UFOs and it's just kind of fascinating. For me, sitting back, it's a little scary, and I'll tell you why. Because when I was younger, when I wanted to go up in the mountains and go for a hike or go for fishing, or way back, and my friends couldn't go, I just went. And now, after everything I've learned, I'm like, I'm not going to go up there alone. I'm not going anywhere near there alone.
What was wrong with me?
I know. I had one experience. When I was back about 14, well, I'd driven back, and then had walked back about 4 miles in on this little stream that I'm fishing. Nobody for I don't know how far. And all of a sudden, when I walked into this opening of trees where the river was, it was almost like a muffling sound. I guess it was a muffling of all sound, I guess you could say, where the deeper in I went to this group of trees, the more sound was muffled, the more the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I whatever was there didn't want me there. And it wasn't until I finally turned and walked out of that area that the birds returned, the sound of the bugs, everything. And I'm just like, I wonder what that could ever possibly be, or what was that, or that was there that didn't want me to be there. Was it ghost related? Was it any Bigfoot? Who knows? So,
and alien, we don't know.
You don't know, yeah.
Entity,
It's weird that
exactly.
We have those kind of window areas, those portal areas. We have them out here. Freetown Forest is a big one out here, and what they call that Bridgewater Triangle in the town of Freetown. It kind of hits Fall River a little bit, or the most cursed of cities, Fall River. That is the known place for having all those phenomena occur.
Right.
Bigfoot sightings, UFO sightings. One of the presidents, I think it was George Bush Sr., actually saw a UFO out of Air Force One flying over it.
As he was flying over the Bridgewater Triangle,
Wow.
Yeah.
Haunted phenomena, and then also
puck wedgies.
The noted puck wedgies.
Puck wedgies, yeah.
Yeah, that's good about the puck wedgie. I didn't realize it reached out that far. I thought it was more local, but I do know it has a Native American background.
Right. And then it goes back to like we were talking about, a lot of things are all over the world. They just have different names, and you learn from folklore, which I love learning about folklore, because I think there's, a lot of times there's a grain of truth, or there's something in there, a nugget of a story that, that happened. And so, yeah, it's just amazing. They just have different names, but it happens all over the world. So
that's right. That's right. And they take it more seriously by different names in different parts, like fairies in Ireland. It's kind of a serious thing. They used to build streets and go around the fairy mounds and things of that nature.
And in Iceland, they still do that. When they make a new highway or something, they will port around one of those the fairy rocks that they call they talk about even to today. So and they take it very seriously in a lot of those places like that. And but you go into, like you say, Native American folklore have their own stories about small creatures, the Pogwodgie, Bigfoot, Wendigo, all of Skinwalkers, all of these fun, crazy things. So
Yeah, the skinwalkers are particularly frightening, right?
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
really like the image of that they put out. So yeah.
yeah, the ability to shapeshift and just if I remember correctly, it goes back to when the Ute Nation and the another Native American nation were at war, and their shaman would basically give up their soul to become skinwalkers to harass the other tribes, and um, something about having to kill a loved one. I can't remember the whole story, but it's really dark, that's for sure.
Yeah, they do tend to be kind of dark stories and a little bit foreboding.
Right.
Anita Allen says skinwalkers are not cryptids; they are a type of native witch.
Right.
Yeah.
Native American witch. Yep. A shaman who has turned to the dark side, from what I understand, and I could be very wrong about that, but it's that's where the original is from. Is that you had a shaman that, like, same with Eastern European history, folklore. You have good witches and you have bad witches, and it's the same kind of thing. Skinwalker is basically a bad shaman, is how you might look at it. So,
yeah, that delved into the darkness until it's taken over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I can see that happening.
very creepy. I think you mentioned you have a new book coming out.
I do. Yeah, it should be out in about 3 weeks. It's going to be called Beyond Stranger US. I do have it is again from stories from all over the United States, and then a few from Canada, and a few from Mexico. So it's expanding. I'm really excited about this one. I've included a few stories. In the past, I've kind of avoided putting stories that might have a little bit darker connotation to them. But I decided to do it, especially with the few that I put in. One with a young woman who had a really bad experience with a Ouija board, and I kind of did it in a way that it of a warning to people to be very careful about what you kind of play with fire, you're going to get burned kind of a situation. So there's definitely at least in my mind, and everybody's got their opinions, but there's a good and a bad way to go about this, and much more scarier ways that people might not understand when they're delving into the paranormal or whatever it is. So
I can't agree with you more.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know that Ouija boards are inherently evil, but people are putting intents together and a belief system of looking on the board, whatever it is, they can certainly open that door, it seems.
Right. Yep. And I kind of explained it to somebody like this. It's like picking up the phone and just randomly dialing numbers. You're not sure who you're going to get on the other side.
Exactly.
And just because they're telling you they're somebody doesn't mean they're really that person. So
they step into roles.
They do.
Right.
Step into roles, yes.
Roles are something we talk about a lot, because how many haunted little girls are there walking around, and women in white, and
yeah,
especially seem to be a role that gets picked often because people love children, feel inherently
if you call upon
protective of them,
that child, that's that little child's spirit, you don't know what's coming in, you don't know if it's really them.
Right. And if you you can invite things into your life too that you don't have control when they leave in some cases, and so you just got to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I understand that.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. You don't know how powerful an entity you're talking to or what they're capable of until it actually happens.
Yeah, definitely. And there's there is in my own opinion, there's a difference between a ghost, somebody who's passed on, that still might be around, and say a different kind of entity. Whatever your belief system might be. And that's the funny thing too, whether you are raised, Catholic or another Christian religion or Muslim or, whatever it is, they all designate that there are, good spirits and bad spirits that are around, I guess you could say. So,
yeah, you got to start to look like archetypes, and that sort of thing. Are they just filling the archetypical roles?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's always the bad guy, and like you said, most people are good, but there's a handful that are not. that just seem to be,
Mm.
kind of evil, or just kind of hating everyone, or
Yeah.
are willing to do things that the rest of us look at and go, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Right.
It seems
Yeah.
to be the other
Sensical,
side. It seems to be that story with aliens. People talk about abductions that are positive, but there's an awful lot of dark stuff going on
Yeah.
too. And
Yep.
so what did you really want to be brought up that way?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we've had guests that said, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And then okay.
Yeah. Yep. And growing up the way I did, and having experiences, nothing that I had I would call evil or mean, or maybe mischievous, but not evil or mean. And so because of that, I have a more of a, I guess, tolerance to when something paranormal might happen. And a lot of people will look at me and be like, well, weren't you just like scared to death when that happened? And I'll be like, no, it's just kind of cool. It was kind of a really cool experience. And so
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with your background, like we were talking about before. So, and your own experience. If your own experience, or the only experience you've had with the paranormal, is negative, that's going to affect you. So for sure. So
Absolutely.
Oh, and another question. You mentioned people like the girl with the dog who had the one paranormal experience and did not have further experiences after that. But a lot of people, particularly again going back to the UFOs and the alien experiences, report other phenomena happening after they've had that kind of contact. I think for ourselves, I think that's kind of true. It's almost like it grows because we've had those experiences. We're more aware. And the people that you've interviewed in your own experience, do you find that to be more the case or less the case?
It's kind of a mixture, but I do totally understand what you're saying, because there's a lot of people out there that will go, they'll go a lot of their life and not have it. And then they'll have that experience, and it almost like it opens their eyes to it. And it'll almost be like, in some people's cases, it's almost like a floodgate. Now they, start having a lot of experiences. They start seeing a lot more things, or they have more experiences. And I'll interview some people who say, well, this is my only experience I've had. But then I'll interview people that are like, oh, I'm going to tell you my best experience, but I've had a lot of experiences that have happened to me. And so, but I do believe that there are people out there that are more prone to open to it, I guess, or more, whether you want to call it a gift, however you want to call it, or the level of that gift of being able to interact, especially when it comes to ghosts and things of that nature. They definitely open themselves up to it, and it does open the floodgates, I guess, to answer your question.
A surge in like related phenomena, like out of body experiences or psychic abilities, telekinesis.
Right. I've never had anybody with telekinesis before, but I have had people, talk to me about out of body experiences. I still have a lot of stories that I have yet to write that are sitting. When I went 20 years without writing a book, I accumulated a lot of stories. So there's a lot of different ones in there. Like I said, it's interesting you mentioned telekinesis, though, because I have interviewed a lot of people, and they're like, oh, just, in the last 6 months, my house has just gone crazy with things moving, or something's gone, I hear things. And the first thing I'll ask them is like, do you have a teenage daughter that just became a teenager? And they'll be like, how did you know? And I'm like, it's amazing to me how that can be connected, especially to teenage girls, but also teenage boys. They almost seem to be a conduit for it. And I'm not sure why that is, but things just start going haywire in the house. And I said, I'll tell them it's going to pass probably, but it might take a year. It's somehow connected to your daughter. And I have no idea why, but the fact that you have a teenager that just, a girl that just turned into a teenager, or a couple in some people's cases, then that can cause a lot of stuff like that to happen. And I don't know why, but it seems to be a connection.
Sometimes hormones or what, but the poltergeist, activity does seem to follow them around a lot of times. I know in parapsychology, they talk about that, the teenagers, in particular, the girls, right?
Yeah.
It is, or tuning into something. I don't know what
It could be. It's just amazing how many times I've run into that just myself.
Yeah, they're just very emotional creatures, and yeah, maybe there's something to that.
I've got one daughter, and so I'm not gonna comment on that, but we all know I've got 2 boys and 1 girl, and they all came with their own challenges for sure. But yeah, somehow the connection with teenagers is you can't deny that, from what I understand, and whether they're causing it or they're a conduit for it, I have no idea. But I know that, moving objects, things getting misplaced, things happening like that can follow teenagers.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Anita Allen said something interesting just now about the pineal gland, because it's not calcified yet. So that's
pineal gland and hormone shift.
yes.
Hits girls harder and faster than boys.
Yep, and that could have something to do with it for sure.
And
you always hope that somebody will do a research paper on it, and and somehow quantify it. But so hard.
We can only make assumptions or
exactly
opinions on what our experiences are. But the new book comes out in 3 weeks. It's Beyond Stranger US.
Beyond Stranger US. Yep.
And where can people find your books?
So they're on Amazon. You can find them on the Kindle or softbacks through Amazon. Most of them are now on Audible as well, if you're big into listening to books, which is great. So, and hopefully the new one will be out on Audible within the next couple months. It takes a little bit longer to get an audiobook out, but yep. And you can also find connections to Amazon through my website. You can also get connected with me if you have a story that you'd like to tell me and talk about it. You can contact me through my website as well.
Oh, that's great. I was going to ask you that because I didn't want to flood your inbox, but people with ghost stories can reach out to you directly.
Yes.
The website's www.strangerbridgeland.com.
Yep.
And that's John Olson we're talking to. So, that's great. I definitely want to dig into some of this stuff. I love a good read. I love a good ghost story. And
awesome.
We look forward to it. I do. I saw a comment here. I think kind of summed things up pretty well. I think it's here. It was Anita. I was lucky. The ghost I grew up with resulted in a passion for paranormal research from an early age. No fear here, just respect, caution, appreciation, and curiosity.
That is perfectly said. Thank you, Anita. That is perfectly said. I could not have said that any better myself. So
that seems to be all our stories here, right? And,
it does.
I love it.
Definitely.
Love it. So it's been wonderful to meet you, John.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, great.
You're welcome.
If you want to hang out, we'll say hi to you in a moment, and we're just going to wrap things up real quick.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
John Olson, thank you. And that will conclude this episode of Bigfoot and the Bunny. And I'd love to thank all the people out there in chat today. A lot of you guys had a lot of comments, questions, and Anita, Ann, everybody else. And I know we didn't get everyone in, but
Dawn,
we do appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening. Next week, we're going to have more paranormal folklore and legend tripping with Chris Balzano. It's going to be great. Yeah, we've had Chris on before. He's a friend of our show, and he's a wonderful guy to listen to.
He's a New Englander.
He's a New Englander. Well, initially, he's in Florida now, so, the trader, kind of like Tom Brady. Oh.
We have to tell him that.
Yeah, we'll make that joke. Wow, I just thought of that now.
Good for you.
Wow.
Hey, and my daughter too. So
that's right. Elizabeth. Wow. Anyways, we'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks again. Appreciate it. And
thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.